Hello, dear seekers of light and truth. The truth is, Oahspe is a wonderful revelation from the heavens, whereas this book teaches every person how to communicate directly with the Creator, how to work out their own salvation, how to unite with others in service and harmony for the good of our world and for the good of all in our lives. The truth is, this book should have sold millions upon publication because it is far superior to any other spiritual revelation, even up to this time in the present day, in the year of 2026. It should have provided all the funds that John Newbrough would ever need to found either kindergarten, homes for the orphans, or utopias such as Shalom. Unfortunately, John Newbrough was neither the person who channeled Oahspe originally, nor a good choice to represent Oahspe to the world. First, by putting in Masonic, Satanic, and false god materials into Oahspe, which have scared people away. I've seen dozens and dozens of people, family, friends, turn away from this book because of what was inside of the strange pictures, the depressing pictures, the vulgar pictures, and words and texts which describe gore and evil and the glorification of false gods. All of this is against the basic principles of Oahspe. What follows next is an AI-generated summary of how the public and the newspapers and the spiritualism movement was reacting to the shenanigans of John Newbrough, starting from 1883. And one of the essential problems for Newbrough was himself. He was constantly making very brash, callous statements which insulted certain segments of the public, and the overall effect was that people stopped buying Oahspe, sales plummeted, and there was a general anti-Oahspe feeling among the spiritualism group. Newbrough started this by publicly stating that the spiritual movement was seriously flawed because it could not have any system of producing mediums, and also because it wasn't doing more in terms of good works where they're working directly for the poor. And the effect was that spiritualism was being blamed unfairly. Therefore, the people who identified themselves as spiritualists, who were in fact the primary audience for Newbrough, since Oahspe was basically a new kind of Bible for spiritualism. So it's very unfortunate that he would speak out against them. Therefore, although publications like the Banner of Light were promoting Oahspe initially through advertisements, what happened was, because the spiritualist movement felt insulted, they therefore put pressure on various spiritualist journals or newspapers saying, if you promote Oahspe, where the quote-unquote channeler, the promoter of Oahspe, John Newbrough, was basically saying that the movement was a fraud, the spiritual movement was a fraud, and therefore everyone should leave it and join his movement, which was the true movement, that they would stop supporting the spiritualist newspapers and journals. Therefore, the editors and owners of the spiritualism publications stopped supporting and promoting the Book of Oahspe itself. Newbrough's original plan, you see, was that the kindergarten homes could be funded by the sale of Oahspe alone. And certainly Oahspe was a remarkable, wonderful work which could sell by the millions. It certainly is a higher and better collection of spiritual writings than the Quran or the Christian Bible. So therefore you would expect, especially among the spiritualist members, to go all in and purchase this very pro-spiritualism book. However, that was no longer possible because Newbrough was basically saying that the spiritual movement had no basis on which to stand, that it couldn't prove anything about spiritualism, that it was all hearsay, and that they had no organized effort to promote spiritualism, and they had no conceived plan for improving society. Therefore, spiritualism should be abandoned. And therefore, everyone in this group, under the tent of spiritualism, should join the Oahspe lodge path that Newbrough was setting up. On top of that, Newbrough also was having some of his ceremonies, the Egyptian ceremonies, being observed by observers from the press and the public. And basically, the whole concept of going back to the Egyptian rites was perceived as very backward and anti-spiritualism, since basically the Egyptian rites put various false gods in the force, such as Osiris and Anubis. And this did not also go very well to the public. Of course, there were a number of Christian spiritualists, and of course the Egyptian rites would be seen as very anti-Christian. Although they predate Christianity, it's basically seen as a false religion, even by the Christians. So while many of the Christians of that time, as they are today, are very enlightened about spiritualism in that they keep an open mind about what spiritualism is about, that is, communication with the unseen world, seeking to know the creator of the universe through their own spiritual abilities and senses. And so they felt very much slighted by Newbrough's criticisms, which were unfair, since spiritualism was doing as much as any other group for helping the world be a better place. They were teaching that people should not depend on organized religion to save them. They should take the spiritual path into their own hands and work out their own redemption, which is basically what Oahspe teaches anyway. So it was really ridiculous for him to pick this fight. The reason he even, but ridiculous, but that's what Newbrough wanted. Newbrough wanted to be the head boss, the top master of all spiritual paths. And he had no intention of being anything but number one. And if that meant that he had to make everyone else look bad to do it, he did it. He criticized basically all other spiritual paths except the one which he headed. And it didn't help that the Egyptian rites made him look ridiculous and backward. And very hypocritical, since it basically meant that the Oahspe movement was no better than an ancient false god religion where people were controlled by priests and masters, certainly worse off than the people of that day under their own religions, whether it was Christianity or whatever religion of the day. So it was a terrible move by Newbrough, and so he lost a lot of support. Okay, because Newbrough did not have the widespread public support anymore, he could not generate the funds necessary for his vision of having these kindergarten schools where abandoned children would be taken care of. So therefore, he had to resort to having very rich sponsors help in this matter. And the natural choice for this was going to be Elizabeth Thompson, who was a prominent spiritualist, but also a prominent philanthropist who was very well off and rich. And so she had many causes where she spent her own money to help other groups seeking to better society. Of course, this is a kind of foreshadowing of what Newbrough would do with Mr. Howland when the move was going to be to Shalom. At any rate, Newbrough was invited by Miss Thompson to live at their farm in the countryside and bring their children and his group and live there. And so Newbrough was very excited about this. They even promised that if things go really well, they would turn all the land over to him so long as things went well. And so Newbrough had turned from the disaster, his public relations disaster, to a close friend who was willing to back him in his vision for having kindergarten homes, for helping the abandoned children of the city. And so maybe a dozen members or so with four children or so, 4 babies, were brought to this farm. Thank you for considering this past video in its messages of truth and insight into how John Newbrough created conflicts with the very people who should have been working with him to bring Oahspe, the greatest spiritualism book ever written, to the world. Spiritualists, by attacking them, by saying they were failing the world somehow, when they were actually part of the solution, by teaching people to think themselves and to seek the Creator in their own way, which is exactly what Oahspe teaches. Unfortunately, Newbrough was very much so seeking to become the head of all spiritual movements, and so he was willing to condemn everyone in his mind, thinking that this would somehow draw people to him, when in fact it would repel them. When you are selfish and seeking only power, that is what happens. You lose sight of what's right, what's wrong, and what will even work. It's unfortunate because millions of Oahspes could have been sold even from the very beginning and created all the money necessary for kindergarten homes for the children or for utopias such as Shalom. However, Newbrough, after alienating everyone, had only one recourse. He couldn't make money anymore off of Oahspe. The sales had dropped dramatically. So the only other choice was to seek very rich people such as Elizabeth